When Nintendo and Tecmo first collaborated on the original Hyrule Warriors back in 2014, it was exactly what I needed to get sucked into the Musou games. I had played one of the Dynasty Warriors games before, Lord knows which one, I can't ever remember one from the other, but it just didn't click with me. It felt repetitive, bland, and too drawn out. Giving me the exact same gameplay formula, but with the backdrop of Hyrule and characters from the Legend of Zelda franchise, however, gave me a chance to experience the genre in a context I already knew and loved. That made me a fan of the larger Musou genre. I couldn't see how Hyrule Warriors could get any better, but with the release of Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity in 2020, the original Hyrule Warriors felt almost like a demo in comparison. I'm not going to say that 2025's Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment was an equally drastic improvement, but it does feel like they took Age of Calamity and perfected the formula. From story to gameplay to performance, this is, so far, the definitive Hyrule Warriors experience. For the most part, the game is an accompaniment to Tears of the Kingdom. If you've played that game, you basically know the overall narrative and major plot points in Age of Imprisonment. That's not to say that it's not worth playing or somehow diminished if you've played Tears of the Kingdom, though. Tears of the Kingdom had you experience the story from the perspective of a single person. Age of Imprisonment expands that, and lets you see and experience the imprisoning war on a scale that the name war implies. It also fleshes out some of the characters a lot, so it's absolutely worthwhile storytelling, even in its own right. The storytelling is a bit constrained here and there by being largely relegated to cutscenes before, during, or after battles, but unfortunately that's kind of the nature of the beast with the Musou genre, and all of the various Warriors games suffer from the same problem. The game features 19 playable characters, each with their own unique special attacks and sync attacks, which is when you and an NPC character team up for a supercharged attack. Every character, with 2 exceptions, uses one of 3 types of weapons: a sword and shield combo, a 2-handed sword, or a spear. The exceptions are Rafika, who is the only character to use a bow, and the Knight Construct, who can use any of the 3 non-bow weapon types. Throughout the game, you'll collect different weapons, as well as Zonai Steel, which can be used to upgrade your weapons. 8 of your characters can't change their weapons for lore purposes, but the other 11 can, so it's worth it to spend some time comparing the weapons you pick up and changing if you find a better one. It's also important to keep in mind that leveling your character isn't the only thing that will help you keep up with the ever-strengthening enemies. You have to make sure that you're upgrading your weapons too. Each weapon can be upgraded up to level 20, so even if you're using a level 70 character, you're leaving a lot of potential on the table if your weapon is only level 2. Being exclusive to Switch 2, it should be obvious that Age of Imprisonment is a huge leap graphically over Age of Calamity. Better textures, more enemies on screen, more intricate animations, and less pop-in all make Age of Imprisonment an easier on the eyes experience than Age of Calamity could ever have hoped to be, even with the fact that, for Switch hardware, that was a pretty impressive game, in my opinion. That said, it's not perfect. The brilliant guys over at Digital Foundry, in their in-depth analysis of the game's performance, noted that there is still some occasional texture pop-in. You can see video compression in some, but oddly not all, of the cutscenes. Nintendo typical lack of anti-aliasing is present, and the game uses a dynamic resolution that varies from 720p to 900p docked, and goes even lower handheld. Performance, likewise, is a huge step up from Age of Calamity, but still not quite perfect. Age of Calamity's performance was not great. It was totally playable, and I loved it, but it targeted 30 frames per second and routinely fell well below that during busy fights. Age of Imprisonment, on the other hand, targets 60 frames per second, and while it's not a locked 60 FPS with numerous dips into the 50s and high 40s, It does maintain 60 frames per second, astoundingly more reliably than Age of Calamity could maintain 30 frames per second. Split-screen multiplayer, unsurprisingly, does drop that target down to 30 FPS, and I've read that there are some frame pacing issues, although my middle-aged eyes have a hard time noticing that unless it's a really big problem. But that's still leagues more playable than Age of Calamity's split-screen multiplayer was. Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment is exactly the kind of game that the Switch 2's first 6 months after launch needed. It successfully takes the ideas introduced in Age of Calamity and polishes them into a smoother, more refined experience, while playing off of the wildly successful and most recent mainline Zelda entry with Tears of the Kingdom. The improved performance alone makes the game drastically more playable, and the graphical step-up really lets the environments that the developers envisioned shine. That's not to say it's a perfect game. There are still some minor texture pop-in issues and frame rate drops. The missions can be repetitive, some of the characters feel pretty similar mechanically, and the story does sometimes struggle to capitalize on the lore set down in Tears of the Kingdom. But all that said, this is probably, at least in my admittedly biased opinion, Tecmo's best Musou game ever, with a whole that really does feel like it's more than merely the sum of its parts. Hyrule Warriors on the Wii U was rather bare bones, and Age of Calamity struggled a lot with performance. But Age of Imprisonment feels like the dream made real. This is a game that absolutely belongs on anyone's Switch 2 shelf. My rating for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity on the Switch 2 is an A.